Welcome back to the Mac and Mike show. I'm Mac and he's Mike. So, anyways, we're here today because I saw this thing on the internet. You know, everything on the internet is true, right? I mean, it wouldn't be on the internet if it wasn't factual. I saw this this young woman talking about the feminist movement, and she shows some pictures of herself earlier in her life where she was a real feminist. And then she starts talking about when she started doing this study of the feminist movement, how she felt, it was her opinion. I did not, it's not my opinion, don't yell at me. She felt the whole thing about the feminist movement was a lie. And she gave several examples about it. And she blamed it on the Rockefeller family, interestingly enough. She said when the Rockefellers found out that you could send women out to work and you could double your taxable income, and side benefit, you get to take the kids into a government school where they can be indoctrinated with the way you want to teach them, that was why the feminist movement took hold and took off. Now, I don't know about any of that, but I did share the video with Mike, and that was the reason for I said, Mike, what do you think about this? Did you have form an opinion?
Yeah, I did. Of course, I do my quick research, and the Rockefeller thing is an old conspiracy theory. And she's young, so she probably didn't study much. She's just winging it from her young point of view. You and I are much older, so we know just without even researching, we understand the
We're
history.
probably already dead and just don't know it. That's how old we are.
That's a possibility. But I mean, the feminist movement started long ago. I mean, we could go way back into ancient history, and I pointed out to you in the kitchen when we were talking that some cultures, were not patriarchies. They had queens. Well, you don't have a queen when you have a patriarchal society. But then you come up to the more modern day, so we'll leave all that history in the past. A lot of it started during the Civil War. One of the main motivators there was the women were the nurses, and seeing all the devastation that was happening to their men folk, so to speak. And then as you move up into the early 1900s, you have World War I and World War II, where women were moved into the factories because the men were overseas fighting the wars. And the Rockefellers did, and other rich people did get caught up in trying to help women. Mac and I are old enough to know that even in the 1950s and 60s, if a man divorced his wife, that was it. I mean, that woman was destined to poverty.
There was real stigma attached to that.
Yeah, and women did not fare as well as they do today. The laws changed. Property is split 50-50. But see, the Rockefellers saw this type of thing, and other rich people, and that's how the conspiracy theory started. All they really wanted to do was to help women so that if it came to a divorce or a husband lost in war or lost to a factory accident or a car accident, that they would not be devastated, that they would be well educated, able to get a job, able to take care of their children without as much of a burden on society. And I think that's a noble and good cause. Now, I think we've gone too far. We know today that, number one, more women own homes than men. And that's because typically the woman gets it in divorce because of the overcorrection, in my opinion, of women being devastated through divorce. And of course, now more college students in STEM, because there's this big push to get women into, STEM. There's more women enrolled in college than men. And I think it's a result of overcorrection. But there was no grand conspiracy theory by the Rockefellers or other rich people to break up the family or to increase the tax base by getting more workers. If they really wanted that, they would have just imported more immigrants. And that's my opinion.
Well, there's the old joke that says, how do you keep the boy down on the farm once he's been to Gay Paris, right? And I think you mentioned World War II. I think there's a very real element of the women's movement that has some of its roots in World War II, because as you noted, World War II was a absolutely a national effort to win the war. And so many of the men were in uniform and were fighting in various places in the world that women were forced to do many of the jobs that they had never done before.
Right.
I know my grandmother was a crane operator for the railroad. That's not a job she would have even been considered for if there weren't this dearth of men who were available to do the work. And I guess she was a pretty good crane operator. I don't think you need to have a certain, yeah. I mean, the machine does all the work, right? You're at the controls. So, but once the women were out in the workforce and they received recognition, not only the hey, you did a good job today kind of recognition, but they got a paycheck with their name on it.
Hmm.
And that's a very empowering thing because, men, of course, from the time we built society, men were used to getting paid and taking money home and paying for what the family needed, that kind of thing. But women getting this paycheck was somewhat, not universally true. You know what I say? All generalizations are false, including this one.
Yep.
But it was for the most for in many women's lives it was a revelation and something new, and I'm sure that it was very, very appealing.
Yeah.
You were no longer restricted to what your husband was or did or earned, but you, quote, had your own money, right? And there is a certain allure to that, right? I mean, there's a certain self confident, self fulfilling kind of ego building element of that. So World War II, I think, had a great deal to do with women no longer wanting to be restricted to the home. But I think it was one of those mirage kind of things, when you're out in the desert and you see that body of water, just a few more miles, and of course it's just the shimmering waves of sunlight. But um, I don't think. Do you think there was a conscious effort to say, hey, look, let's double the incomes of the home and let's put women to work everywhere and double the taxes we receive?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think it was more or less a morphing kind of thing where, once women got involved, they wanted more of it, not necessarily because they wanted to be rebellious, but because it was so ego fulfilling and
Sure.
so there was a lot of positive reinforcement there. Um, but we did change with the feminist movement. We did change that somewhat. I don't think that there is a. I guess you could say it's not wrong to say that the feminist movement indirectly led into this whole DEI and some of these other movements that
Absolutely.
changed the scope of the face of the workplace. I mean, we just saw something in the news here recently where this magazine did a story that said, millennial men for a period of time, maybe as long as 10 years, were absolutely precluded from getting a job in their field of expertise or the field that they desired because of these quotas and the whole DEI and the woke part of it that said we need to have people who are of a certain fill in the blank, whether that was color, creed, sex, station in life or sexual preference. I mean, we had to fill certain categories with certain numbers, and so straight white men of majority race were really. I mean, this is not hyperbole. This is not a conjecture. This magazine did a study and actually came up with the raw numbers of the people who were disadvantaged because they were white men and usually Christians. And so they absolutely were discriminated against, and many of them didn't get jobs, which was very, very different from 30 years prior to that, when if you were a white man Christian, you probably got the job. You're
Yeah.
probably given a preference instead of other people. So I don't want to say, I'm not singling that out as being a terrible thing because maybe maybe white men did get privilege in a patriarchal society that was before the war. I don't know the answer to that. I was born in the 50s, so I didn't see I didn't experience the pre-war attitudes towards society. But I do know that, what you said about divorce, and most women pre-World War II did work in the home. They were homemakers and they were moms. And we lived in California in the 60s. And even then, most women were still stay-at-home moms. And do you remember the song that the um, Mother's Little Helper, the little
Oh, Jefferson Airplane.
no, it was the Rolling Stones.
Go running for the shelter of Mother's Little Helper. The
Yeah,
pill. The
yeah, yeah,
pill.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
Grace Slick.
that was in those times, women were home, and the children were gone, and they went to school, and mom would take a pill. You know, interesting times. That I'm not. I don't. That's not necessarily conducive to what we're talking about here. But what did the feminist movement mean for American society? And I think there was a clear and dramatic shift in our attitudes, which opened up the door for a lot of these other um, kinds of quotas that we have in our world today. You know, it wasn't that long ago in the Biden administration when the head of the Air Force made a public, the general in charge of the Air Force said, it's my goal to have 50% of all our pilots are going to be men of color. Well, that's hard to do when your population is 13% men of color, right? But that was his goal. And you think about that, and it's the old saying when you're getting on a plane, do you want the DEI hire, or do you want the guy that was top of his class flying your airplane, Sully Sullenberger, when he saved those people by landing the plane in the Hudson River, he was an old white guy that was a Vietnam War pilot,
Yeah.
I mean, so the experience he had saved lives. Isn't that really what we should be striving for, the meritocracy instead of the and what did the feminist movement do? Do you remember all the men's organizations that had to close or had to open? Do you remember when the Masters, when the golf club at Augusta did not have women members?
Yeah.
Wasn't that long ago?
Wasn't.
And that was not uncommon. What was interesting to me, though, during the feminist movement, we weren't allowed to have men's clubs, but you were allowed to have women's clubs. You weren't allowed to have, various things that belonged to men only, but women still had the women only things.
Yeah, it's often been pointed out like ladies' night at a bar.
Mm-hmm.
There's never a men's night.
Well, you're not my type, Mike. I wouldn't be buying you a drink anyways.
No, but women don't go out and buy men drinks, is what I was talking about. I'm
Funny,
talking about heteronormative behavior, my brother.
funny story. When I was taking my daughter was in her late teens or early 20s, and she was meeting some friends downtown. And I knew she didn't have a job, so I'm driving her downtown, but she's going to link up with her girlfriends, and they're going to be together, and her girlfriend's going to bring her home. So all she needed was a ride so I said to her, because I know she doesn't have any money, I said, do you want me to give you a couple of bucks? You want me to give you some money? She looked at me kind of quizzically, and then this funny, she smiled, and she said, Dad, you don't think I buy my own drinks, do you?
Right.
And I thought to myself, how dumb was that? My daughter was a very attractive young blonde woman, and yeah, I'm sure they're not, and if I was in the bar when these guys are trying to buy them drinks, I'm probably going to want to, it wouldn't be a pleasant sight because I want to be protecting my daughter. But yeah, I can still hear her voice, Dad, you don't think I buy my own drinks, do you? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's just the way that the feminist movement has changed things a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, and then you look at Tammy Bruce, for example. She was the head of the National Organization of Women. She was a feminist. She still considers herself a feminist, but she's the old-fashioned type feminist. And now she's a conservative, Republican, just straight shooter. And she just believes in equality for everyone. She's a lesbian. But, the most interesting thing about her is not her sexuality. And she does not use that as a cudgel And she doesn't talk about it. She talks about the issues. She's issue oriented. And now she is, she resigned from the head of the National Organization of Women, and she resigned, I think, from the whole thing. And now she pushes back on it because she said it went too far. And that's exactly what I said. I think the movement was good in the beginning. Women were the underdogs and second class citizens for a long time, at least here in America. But there's another thing. Somebody pointed out that in the early colonial days, when this country was being founded, it was a very religious nation. And even though the clergy is of course historically men, the women were actually the glue that held the religious views together. And they had the empathy and things.
Same thing with the family.
Yeah.
A good woman will hold a family together.
Yeah, but she let the man lead, or at least she let the man think he was leading. And women used to be very good at that, letting men think that they were in charge.
Well, not letting them think they're in charge. They're in charge, but they're in charge with some really, really, really good advice from their spouse,
It's kind of like cats. You think you own them? No, they own you.
I think it's interesting, Mike, that women are almost forced into choosing a career in lieu of choosing to be a mom and a housewife. And I'm not saying that's the right thing for everyone. My daughter has a great job, a very large salary. Her husband, unfortunately, because of the job he ended up disabled from an accident. Not an accident, but it was something that happened at work that should never have happened, and he was limited. And their roles were reversed, where she started becoming the breadwinner and he started becoming the house husband, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I had 6 children. I had 3 boys and 3 girls. And as a dad, you love your girls as you love your boys. But that love manifests itself differently. With your girls, you want to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
You have this great overriding desire. If something happens to them, you want to go hurt somebody that hurt them. It's not something you think about. It's an instantaneous
it's instinct.
DNA level kind of instinct that hits you. You want to go hurt somebody that hurt your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
When someone hurts your son, you know that your son has to get beat up a little bit in order to be able to be tough enough to make it in this world. And he has to be tough enough to overcome those things, and he has to maybe hurt other people in return. But you feel, not that you love them less, you just love them differently. But that doesn't preclude me from wanting my daughters to have every opportunity that they possibly could accrue. Now, having said that, I also know that there are differences when you talk about equal opportunity. If you're going to be a the Wichita lineman for the county,
right?
When you're going to be climbing up these poles in 32-degree weather and doing dangerous jobs connecting, that's not necessarily the kind of job you want your 4'8" petite little daughter to be participating in. And is that discrimination to not have a woman do that job? Maybe it is, or maybe it's just common sense, So I do think that there are jobs that not necessarily should anyone be discriminated against, but you need to use common sense and logic in determining the right kind of candidates. Now, I'll also say this, when you're working in an office environment, I don't know that there's many jobs that a masculine kind of stronger muscles, bigger build, stronger bones, taller, stronger, all that kind of stuff makes a difference. I had a conversation one day with a female that I worked with, and I said something to her about a certain not understanding the kind of work that goes on in a rough and tumble road crew work. And and she looked at me and she says, "You're right, I don't, but you don't know what it's like to be a woman in the office either." And, I thought about that, and that hit me hard. And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, you're probably right. And I actually sent her an email later, and I want you to know if I ever said anything inappropriate or, that it was dumb. But, women in the workplace, they get hit with all kinds of innuendo and inappropriate remarks and all that kind of stuff. Nobody says to a guy, "Hey, you look really great in those jeans." You know what I mean? And when a woman gets that kind of comment, she has to stop and think about exactly what that means, because it could have multiple meanings. And let's face it, guys are pretty crude on a regular basis because we're men, and we say and do crude things.
Yeah, this is where a gradation comes into play, because you stop and think about it. Women dress a certain way, and society and culture promotes dressing a certain way for attractiveness. I mean, look at any department store. Go to the women's clothing area. It's 10 times bigger than the men's department. They got makeup.
And eight times more expensive.
Yes, and they have makeup, and they have jewelry. And women want to look good. And what they don't realize is if you look good, you're going to attract the things that you don't want attracted to you. But you're going to attract.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a woman doesn't want every man, just like a man doesn't want every woman.
Wait a minute.
Well, maybe your case. I'm a little more discretionary. I don't want every woman. But more so than not with women, they want to attract the person.
For the record, I don't want every woman. I was trying to be funny.
Yeah.
Just want to put that.
Notice he said trying to be funny. So anyway,
I think I'm hilarious.
That makes one of us.
Thanks, Mike.
I think everybody.
I like you too.
Yeah, I think everybody understands the point that you're going to attract, if you're an attractive woman, ugly fat guys too. Not just good-looking studs.
Speak for yourself, ugly fat guy.
Yeah, and you're gonna attract guys with no money, and you really want the guy with money. So
you're kind of like a guy with teeth too, and
with teeth
and lack of body odor. All those are good things.
All those things help. But that's it. I mean, so there's this. Men and women are not equal. There's a sense that if we're doing the same exact work, we should get paid exactly the same.
I believe in that.
I do too. But most of the time, they pointed out that they say women only get paid 76 cents on the dollar for men. But the facts come out later that because women are still the nurturers at home, if their child gets sick at school, they're the ones taking off.
Mm-hmm.
If they have menstrual cramps or something and they have to go home early.
Maternity leave.
Yeah. They also have more doctor's appointments than men. So they're going to be missing work more, and that accounts for the 76 cents.
A big portion of it.
Because
absolutely.
Like Hillary Clinton was one big example. They pointed out that all her female staff got paid 76 cents on the dollar compared to the men, just like the civilian workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't being unfair. It's just they missed that much work. Or even Hillary Clinton herself valued them that much less. Maybe not for equal work, but hired them in lower positions. So, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of just wrong thinking when it comes to all of this. And one of my favorite books is my son-in-law turned me on to, which I can highly recommend, is called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I'm a slow thinker most of the time. We all think fast and have to, like when we're driving or doing something. But as you pointed out, I'm a granular.
Yes.
I get into the details. I ask a lot of questions. I don't just assume that what I'm hearing is true. Like the video you sent me.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to sit there and say, oh, yeah, I agree. The Rockefellers were, trying to do this or that. If you just look at it and do some research, it's not the case. The Carnegies were involved and others to try and lift women up in general. It's unintended consequences.
No, the video I sent you was just really a focal point for the issue of feminism, and that one young lady's attitude towards being a very staunch feminist to being much more conservative in her views on what was the right station in life for a woman. And I believe everybody, women and men both, all colors, classes, creeds, nationalities, religious, etc., should all have opportunities to follow their dreams. I believe in what I would call equal rights, if you wanted to use that term, although that term has been bastardized somewhat over time. As I said, I want my girls to have every opportunity that my boys had, but I do understand that there are certain jobs that women are better suited for, just like there are certain jobs that men are better suited for, and I think we ought to use common sense about it. What I don't believe is um, I'll talk about one young lady I know. It's a family member, and she is works for one of the big five accounting firms, and she's on the fast track to becoming a partner in that firm, which means she'll be a millionaire. Okay, um, and she's married, and her husband has a good job in logistics, so they both are big wage earners. They have fantastic kind of lives. They vacation in exotic places every year. They have a beautiful vacation home that they built from scratch, buying the lot, building the building, and they rent it out whenever they're not using it. So they clearly are that upper tier of societal wage earners, but they've made a conscious decision, both of them, not to have any children. And I don't know um, that they understand that that decision to not have children, how it impacts her parents, because her parents were very excited to have grandchildren, and they're not going to have grandchildren now, at least from this child, because of her life decisions. And I don't want anyone to hear what I'm saying and say, "What do you want other people to make?" No, I don't want other people to make decisions for them. I just don't think that this young lady has carefully thought out the ramifications of her decisions, not only for herself but for her family members. And in the old days, we used to have spinsters. Do you remember the term spinster? Have you heard it recently? I mean, anytime in the last 40 years? Aunt May was a spinster. What a spinster was is a woman who never got married, and therefore she didn't get married, she didn't have a job, she didn't have a career, and she didn't have children. So how was her life
Impacted,
valued
yeah.
in society? And they came up with this word, which I think they meant in a complimentary way, or they wanted it to be meant in an understanding but it always seemed to me that that was the ultimate put down. I mean, you were a spinster. What good were you? You didn't have a job. You didn't earn money. And oh, by the way, you weren't a mom, so you didn't have children to add to the. So we don't use those kinds of words anymore. But um, I think that making that kind of career decision is one of those decisions that gets you later in life. You don't appreciate the ramifications of that decisions when you're 35, 40, or even 50. You start to realize the ramifications of those decisions when you're 60 or 70 and you're retired. And
You're alone.
yeah,
Yep.
nobody really likes being alone, do they? No man is an island.
Right.
Um, I have five surviving children, and with those five surviving children, I have five additions to my family, spouses for those five children, and then from a few of those children, I have grandchildren, and now even great grandchildren, and they are all the love of my life. And I don't know what joy there would be in my life without my family today, and I feel badly for people who don't have that kind of joy in their life. Now, I'm judging it based on the way I look at the world, the way I look at life, the way I look at so maybe they don't miss that. And maybe being alone and going on cruises or whatever else you like to do, maybe that's fulfilling enough for them and their lives. I certainly don't want to put anyone down for their life choices. I just wonder whether or not everyone understands, especially a woman, when she chooses the fast tracked career, and chooses not to have children. Um, and that doesn't even begin to talk about all the children that we've lost due to abortion, that these children that were never born, which is a whole other subject for another day. I don't want to bog us down with that on this video, but that too, I think, was part of the feminist movement. My body, my choice, I think, came from the feminist movement, not from the moms of the world.
Yep.
It's an interesting dynamic, Mike, and I think that if you add up the feminist movement into being the precursor for some of these other DEI carve-outs, you look at the feminist movement as being the leading edge of these millennial men not getting an opportunity to pursue the career that they might want or need or love, because it is just a fact that white men have been discriminated against, and kind of like an anti-discriminatory. And maybe guys, you're my age, maybe we did have an advantage in the workplace, um, because we were white men. That could be. I don't know that to be true. I know that there was a time in my life when I worked for a very large company, and I wanted to apply for a certain job. And I talked to the manager who had the job posting open for it, and I said, I applied to the job in your department, and I haven't gotten a call back because I'm pretty bold. I don't sit back and just accept things. So I called the guy, the manager of the department that had the job opening, and it was a manly man's job. I mean, it was a dirty hands, blue collar kind of work with your back as well as your mind kind of job. And I called Roger and I said, Roger, I said, I had my application in to transfer from this department to your department for 3 months now. I haven't even gotten a phone call. And his voice got really soft and low and quiet. And he said, Alan, I gotta tell you, that job has to be a woman. I can't hire a man for that job. So just don't bother. Just don't bother applying. I can't give it to you if I want. I knew we were in a volleyball league together, because our company had this like thing where we did a couple of nights a week. We went and played volleyball, and we picked up teams. It was great. It was exercise, and it was a great out way to not only to stay in shape but to wear off some of your frustrations. But I said to Roger, I said, Roger, 3 months now I've had my application in transfer. I've not even got a call. And then he let me know. It was an EEO kind of. We have to have a woman fill this job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, there's been times when it wasn't good for me. And this job involved lifting heavy wooden ladders. And I said to Roger, I said, Roger, the average woman can't lift that ladder. He said, no, we're getting aluminum ladders. It's again, those times were difficult to accept sometimes. So I don't know. That was another the whole EEO momentum was, I think, an outgrowth or a parallel track to the feminist movement, and the burning of the bras, and we're not going to take it anymore and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, Mike. Did we beat this up enough?
I think so.
Are you ready to close it up?
Yep.
Do you have anything pithy to add to the conversation?
No, sir.
Would you like to invent something pithy to add to our conversation?
Can't think of a thing.
You always were kind of pithy, so not having something pithy to say is rather surprising to me. I guess what we should say is Mac and Mike
Out.
out.